Hello.
Yeah.
Hello.
You all hear me up there? I want to welcome all of the Fall River baseball fans to our last lecture, unfortunately. This week's
He just did it for me.
Fall River professional baseball in the year of Pearl Harbor and during the Korean War. And our presenter this evening will be Dr. Phil Silvia Jr., who graduated from Providence College in 1964 and received his PhD degree in history from Fordham University in New York City. Phil was, I just confirmed, spent 50 years as a teacher at Bridgewater State. And finally, he's a professor emeritus at Bridgewater State. By the way, all of our 4 lectures have been supported and sponsored by Grimshaw Goodowitz Charitable Foundation. I'd ask all of you to put in your calendar 2 events that are coming up. We will have the 4 evening serenades starting on August the 4th. 4 weeks of serenades in August. In the interim, we have Shakespeare in the Garden on July 28th and July 29th, and it will be a reenactment of Hamlet. So all of the literature you're looking for, you can find it right there on the desk. I've been asked to remind you of 2 things. One, there is I was told, yes, there is a little pot over there for money. But I know that most of you are already members of the Fall River Historical Society. But if not,
Press the button.
press the button.
Yeah. Press it, hold it. There you go.
Okay. I press the button again. For those of you who are not members of the Fall River Historical Society, please join us. We'd be happy to have you as members and as volunteers. And now I'll turn you over to Phil.
Thank you, Jay. I want to thank the Historical Society for all that it's done in making this possible, and for BCC as a host institution. And it's just been a wonderful series this summer with Bob and Bill and Stephanie. And I'm going to stop with Stephanie. Can she have another round of applause? She's just the heart and soul of what we do in these lectures and in many other things. So I appreciate everything that she's done.
Until I screwed up tonight.
So let's have some fun. We'll talk about where I left off. This is my 5th lecture. So the last time I talked briefly about the fact that soccer was the king in 1941, both before and after. And much of that, as you know, was at Mox Stadium just over the line in Tiverton because of the Sunday Blue laws in Massachusetts. And so we had the greats that can be appreciated through biographies that appear in the Cream of the Crop book. And there's been a recent opportunity to watch this and other things online. Mox Stadium drew as many as 15,000 fans, and it typically averaged 8,000 fans. Sometimes that was more than the Boston Red Sox would draw on a Sunday. So it was that popular, and those that followed would know about Billy Gonzalez, called the Babe Ruth of soccer. And there he is with Britt Patnaud. Britt Patnaud was the first person to score a hat trick in World Cup play from Fall River. And here he is, the two of them, just great athletes. And this fellow is Johnny Redder. And I asked Steph to include that because Johnny Redder was not only a goalie in hockey, but he crossed over and became a Major League Baseball player as well. So that's sort of the transition I'm going through from recognizing that the number one sport in terms of turnout was soccer, but we'll focus on of course, baseball. And we hadn't had baseball in a professional way since the team sort of petered out around 1913, 1914. And then, again, with Sunday Blue laws and with the Great Depression, there wasn't much of an emphasis. But there was this person, Claude Davidson, who some people think was sort of a Don Quixote, but he really had a dream of keeping the New England League going and alive once again. And so the long shot is, with his leadership in 1941, we had the beginning of the New England League coming into play. And Fall River was, of course, a participant. That's why we're here talking about it tonight. So there were 5 Massachusetts teams. There were a couple from Rhode Island, and there was one at Manchester, New Hampshire. And so Fall River was on, ready to play at this point. And go back one, Steph, to crowd of 4,000, maybe, if we have. Yeah, so this is the opening game, an away game, and it got a good turnout for 4,000 attending. And Fall River met defeat by an 8-2 score. And then the question would be, what would happen with the New England League going forward? Now, the league is going, of course, because of World War II, to have its challenges, but it is going to manage to exist for the duration of the war. So we do have a New England League beginning in 1941, which we are going to concentrate on. And the New England League played outside teams on occasion, because they developed so-called floodlight baseball before the Braves and the Red Sox. So they had a capacity to offer night games as well as weekend games. And so some interesting people played against New England League teams during World War II. And there's Yogi, who was one of them. And next we have, just stopping with Crash Davis, of course, the famous film Bull Durham has Kevin Costner playing the role of Crash Davis. But Crash Davis is a real player in the NEL during this time. The NEL actually played against him. He did both. He was a minor leaguer and a major leaguer. So Crash played, really interesting. You saw the Ted Williams special, I'm sure, if you're baseball fans, the other night. That game when Ted Williams went up and played the doubleheader at the end rather than settling for 400. He was 6 for 8, everybody mentions, but he was really on base 7 times because Crash Davis was against him and he made an error. So Ted made it almost 8 for 8. The games were played to a large audience, especially when the Kansas City Monarchs, an all-black team, came in. And who was leading the Kansas City Monarchs? Satch. Okay, so let's look at Satchel Paige.
Everyone knew him as Satchel. God gave him a fastball, a quick. Satchel pitched for more than 40 years on makeshift rural sandlots and in major league ballparks against the best in the game. He was the most celebrated player in the Negro Leagues, and because some victories came against white major league opponents, he set the stage for baseball's integration.
Jimmy Pearsall was on base against Satchel one time, and he mimicked his pitching motion. I'm not sure Satchel appreciated it, but the crowd loved it. So there were games where McCoy Stadium opened up around July 4th of 1942. They played Lynn, and 6,000 fans attended. And then there was a game with the Red Sox where 9,000 people came to play to watch the Pawtucket Slaters. And the big turnout of all was in 1945 when a NEL team played the Yankees in an exhibition game and drew 14,000 fans in what turned out to be a very close 4-3 win for the Yankees. So let's go back to 1941 and the fact that Fall River is now committed to the New England League. It was impossible to get the Fall River Stadium in decent working order in order to have a season opener. So I'm not sure what happened with the situation at the stadium. But at any rate, Tommy Hammond was going to be the player coach. And Tom had gone to Providence College and then had played professional ball north of the border. And so he organized things, and after the Fall River Stadium tryout, they had practices at North Park and at Ruggles Park, and then they played games, and everybody was invited to try. And so if you thought you were a good ball player in Fall River, you had a chance to make the team in 1941. Hammond also was being promoted. They decided, let's have a nickname contest, generate some fan support. 2 tickets for the winner, that's a big prize. He tried to get people beyond Fall River because he knew that the talent level was not sufficient to be competitive. And he tried to get a bunch of people, but we're sort of late in the game. And so he's a little bit frustrated about that. But he is happy when Elton Deuce decides to play for the Fall River team. Deuce had gone south with the Red Sox the previous year to spring training. And the great Huey Duffy said that he had one of the finest arms he ever witnessed in decades of watching Major League ball players. He sort of showed off that arm in one of the future games that year by picking off 2 runners at second base in the same game. And he also hit a 460-foot home run against Lynn. So he's a good addition. The best local player was Ray Cody. Ray Cody has always been a heavy hitter, as the records tell us, and so Hammond depended on him as the season got underway. Now, the Herald News was great in terms of the first home game is going to be Memorial Day, and in a very enthusiastic way, it projects we're going to have one of the greatest crowds in local baseball history, and the game's going to be played at Chew Field. So that's the field named after Thomas Chew. And everybody was told that Thomas Chew Field is located just west of East Main Street with entrances on Slade Street and Globe Street. 3 gates will be open to accommodate the expected large crowd, 2 on Globe Street and 1 on Slade Street. What was going on at the same time was Joe Madowski was doing well with a national amateur soccer team at Fall River Stadium, and sort of show me the money. The Fall River baseball teams being advertised here in the Prevost yearbook of 1942. And they have a big advantage in terms of fan interest because on opening night, there's also going to be midgets racing around Fall River Stadium. Stephanie thought, as we said last year, that these were little people having a race. But they were midget cars, Stephanie, as I tried to make you. But you know, my favorite short story is by James Thurber, and it's called You Can Look It Up. Anyone familiar with it? It features a midget, and it's illustrated by Norman Rockwell. And the midget goes up to bat, and he's not supposed to swing, and he does swing, and the story becomes hilarious. But basically, this was written right at the time that Fall River was starting to play in 1941, and it gave Bill Veeck the idea of using an actual little person, Eddie Goodell, 10 years later. Now, the sponsors. We're going to be talking a lot about people that are promoting organized baseball, professional baseball. They're hoping to have permanent stands the following year, and they dream of Fall River having a Class A level team. That's what the hope is. Let's see what the reality is. So, headline in the Fall River Herald News as we get towards Memorial Day, we're opening up. The Fall River New Bedford sports rivalry is just as strong as in the old days. The return of the New England baseball to this city brings back memories of the old athletic grounds, which I've spoken about, that were at Oak Grove Avenue and Bedford Street. And as they said nostalgically, there are few of the younger fans who have not heard from their fathers about deeds of the many players who went from the NEL to the majors and made the grade. And again, as I showed in my earlier talks, as many as 14 people from the team of 1877 and 78 made the major leagues, including a couple of Hall of Famers. And the teams of the 1890s were just as good. So in those 2 decades, we were just a notch below major league level. Well, the outfield had been rolled the previous night as part of the preparation, and there's a big rush to set up on game day, and management's appreciative that young boys in the neighborhood set the stands up. More about that later. And it was reported, once the game was played, that 1,100 adults attended the game and 400 children. The mayor, Alexander Murray, threw out the first pitch. The catcher missed it. A bad omen. I don't know if it hit the umpire, but hopefully not in terms of what's ahead. Anyway, here we are almost 30 years later. Everybody's excited. It's the top of the first inning, and nerves take over. The pitcher is lousy. They make 3 errors, and New Bedford's ahead by 5-0 at the end of the top half of the first inning of the first game in a generation. Guess what? Fall River rallies to win. Okay, so we win our first home opener 9-5. And that had to do with the fact that in the first inning, a young 19-year-old named Billy Pierce from Westport pitched, and he pitched 8 1/3 innings of scoreless relief. That name sticks in my craw. Do you remember, Red Sox fans, how crafty Billy Pierce of the White Sox would always manage to beat the sluggers of our Red Sox? But at any rate, that was a very good beginning. There was one casualty on opening night. Catcher Deuce showed off his aforementioned throwing accuracy by flipping his mask backwards, and it hit the umpire in the face and knocked the umpire out of the game. So that's... Now, we had a very caustic reporter, despite the Red Sox victory, and I guess you wouldn't want to be one of the players reading the paper the next day. The poor work of Caravan in right field. He appeared to be all at sea in judging fly balls, in addition to being slow. There's a failure of some of the players to cover more ground than they are required to stand on. So we're not sure this is going in the right direction. Well, the season does progress, and the next person we need to look at is Walt Ripley. Walt Ripley is our star as the season progresses. The problem is that he's in the service, and he's stationed at Fort Edwards. And so management tries to convince the military to release him during the games, but they'll only let him pitch on weekends. And so that's going to have an effect on it. But this is the greatest day in 1941. Okay, Lynn is the best team, and there's 22 scoreless innings by Ripley. He threw a 1-hit shutout against Pawtucket, and then he had this shutout against the best team in the league, and Fall River had their hitting hats on that day, and it was just a wonderful time. Unfortunately, it was very infrequent. And so late in the season, some of the players sort of were a little bit jaded, and they were supposed to go all the way to Manchester, and they were afraid they weren't going to get paid, and they were a little reluctant about it, but they finally went. What was really holding them back was they had already done this once before, and it was called a memorable trip by the Fall River Herald News. They went to Manchester, they played an afternoon game. They get on the bus to come home. They're on their way, the bus runs out of gas. They wait a long time to have that taken care of. Off they go again. Motor problems. So the bus is stuck for a second time. Takes forever to finally get things repaired. And then in the wee hours of the morning, one of the players, Joe Galvin, decided to light up a cigarette, and he committed another error, and he dropped it between the cushions, and now the bus is smoldering. And so they finally got back for a shower at the boys' club at 6 a.m. the following morning. So, well, that was offset by probably the big single night of the year when the House of David, a traveling team, will come to town. And these are like the baseball version of what will later become the Harlem Globetrotters in basketball. And I'll say some more about this. But they had generators and portable lights, so they traveled the country. They were a barnstorming team as early as 1930, and their home base was Benton Harbor, Michigan, and their founders were communal Adventists, and their idea was to reunite the 12 tribes of Israel. At any rate, they thought that they could export their message and play good ball at the same time, so teams traveled around, and they met all types of competition along the way, and we'll see a little of that right now. It's fast. Great footage. They actually considered asking Babe Ruth late in his career to join the House of David, but then they considered his lifestyle. And that's where the problem of this religious group was, because as you've already seen, among men, shaving was forbidden. So too was alcohol. So too was sex. So the long-term prospects weren't good. At any rate, they do come to Fall River, and it's very special because Lefty Grove, my old friend Mr. Cohen said, he could throw a lamb chop past a wolf. He said the fastest he ever saw. So Lefty Grove is pitching for the Red Sox. It's been a struggle, but he's just won his 300th game. And he has a son, and Tom Hammond gets together, and they agree they'll play a game, and Bob Grove will be the pitcher against Fall River. They invited Lefty to stay in Fall River for the game, and he begged off because the game was starting, for whatever reason, at 9 p.m. So he said, I can't go back to Boston that late. And so he's not there, but the game is held. And one of the things that happened wherever they went is they entertained the local community by their tricks, and they were famous in the fifth inning for a game of pepper, a pepper game. And we have a little bit of footage about that. One of the House of David players was from Fall River. He was named Chet Veronese.
My uncle.
All right. And Bill just died, the youngest brother. Sorry to hear that, but I would love to have known that connection, because I would love to have had the conversation about the House of David memories, etc. But Pat played for Fall River, so there's two brothers, one playing for the House of David and one playing for Fall River. Now, many of you were here before, but 2 years ago, I was able to talk about the Fall River Indians from 1946 to 1949, and I jumped ahead purposely because we had older gentlemen that had played and been part of the Fall River Indians. And I'm so grateful that I did, because two of them are no longer with us, but we have captured them. By the way, if you go to Google and you do video archive of the Fall River Historical Society, all of these talks are available. So anyway, Bino grew up around Columbus Park, and he became a favorite of us, I think, 2 years ago, and he has a little commentary about one of the Veroneses. Those are the people that...
grew up in the sands of Columbus Park, and I was crazy about baseball. I lived in Aden. There used to be a sewer cover in the Columbus Park where the water used to go in. And it was winter time. Believe me, it was winter time. And there used to be a sewer cover, and I used to clean the plate like that. And there was a Chet Von East. He used to play for the House of Davis. I don't know if you heard of House of Davis, and you know, and he used to live right next to the farm. And he used to come up and he used to pitch to me on this in the winter. You know, and I used to play, you know, the snow used to be about that high.
Well, as the season progressed, it was quite obvious we had one star, and that was Ray Cody. I'm just going to cut a bit from that, Steph, but he had many offers to play in a faster league, and he professed great loyalty to Fall River, and he was on board. He said, Fall River's going to have a really great team next year, so I'm going to not take advantage of the opportunities to play elsewhere. But look at the average. He was leading the league. He's a remarkably good player. And finally, management decides that though he wants to stay, he's expendable. And so what happens, this is jumping ahead. Now, this is another of the people that we videoed 2 years ago, the great Bill Hawkins. And this is 1946 when he does this. And Ray Cody, that we're talking about now in 1941, is still playing baseball for the Providence team of the New England League of 1946. And they're way ahead of the Fall River team, as was typical of the Fall River team. And Bill Hawkins has a memory of what happened when he hit a ball to Ray Cody.
The ball was lost to the Rocks. I just go running. I showed the Ray but knew what the ball was, but he said,
So that was Bill's one home run, because Ray Cody, I think, could have picked up the ball and prevented it from being a home run, but he did a hometown favor. Well, as the season goes on, it's getting more difficult. They're not playing all the time, as we'll see. There's a sort of an undercard game between the Chew Red Sox and the Florida Colored Hobos. I don't know what that was about in terms of the game, but at any rate, they finally decided we've got to do better, and so there's a Boosters Day, and the fate of the Fall River team is in the hands. This is actually Ray Cody being sold for $150 to Pawtucket. And go on. So this is the hope, that there's going to be a great turnout, and so they said, if you come, women are going to get charged for the first time. If you catch a foul ball, you got to throw it back. We can't be wasting money. Can't be wasting money. So they had a good turnout, supposedly, but not good enough. And so what ultimately happened is Fall River had a playoff game. They lost badly, 9-1. They only had 3 hits. And the next day, it was reported that Fall River's record for the season was 9-16, and the best team was at 24-9, Lynn. Cody actually had a good time. He was traded to Pawtucket, and he became the star. And Pawtucket finished the season 4th, but they won the playoffs against Lynn very dramatically by 1 run in the 7th game of the 7-game series. And Cody was very successful. So what we really had now was a semi-pro team, not like before or after, because they hadn't played enough games to be considered. They're not even in the register of the major and minor leagues in this particular year. Now the question is, at the end, if we could see that stuff, the big activity is still at Fall River Stadium, and there's some 1,500 patrons that want to go to this event. While Fall River can't draw much in baseball, We have the death divers, and this is incredibly interesting. Guy goes around as fast as he can. He's Evel Knievel. He goes up a platform, over a truck, and they've got a car parked there for him to crash into. So that's what happens for entertainment at Fall River Stadium. So I think maybe Crash Davis, the baseball player, should have been at Fall River Stadium. But the question we have to ask is, could Fall River Indians dodge death at the end of this season? Would there be another season? Well, we can find out because we've got the insider's view of what was happening. We can take almost a family trip down memory lane, if we may. This is Burke's, where Dunny's is now, and this was our grandfather Burke, who put up the Burke building that George Petrin has thoroughly researched for me, and I appreciate that. And there's my grandfather, Big T as we call him, a very dapper dresser. So just hold on this for a family, then this is the connection. So that's Tom Burke and Judge Frank Silvia, and my Aunt Mary and my Uncle Frank, and that's Attorney Frank Silvia Jr., who we're going to focus upon. They're married. They live at Maplecroft. Okay. Our grandfather Brick has lost his wife prematurely, so he lives at Maplecroft as well. My mom and my dad beneath that, so 2 sisters married 2 brothers. And so that's the setup. And the reason I show you this is because there's Judge Silvia, born in 1882. So he obviously liked baseball as early as 1890. And so now we're going, 50 years later, he still has a love of baseball, and that's been imbued into his son, Frank Jr. And so that's the Burke building, and you can see that the law office of Frank Silvia, father and son, they are tenants of their friend, Big T Burke. And next door is Fraser's department store, Walt Frase, with Dr. Dan and Judge Ted Harrington's father, J.J. Harrington, as a silent partner. And so that's the setup. That's the setup. Walter Frase is the secretary of the league, and people buy all the equipment from Fraser's Sporting Goods store. Everybody remembers Drape Fish Market, right? Mr. Drape, Vernon Drape, is the president of the organization, and Frank Silvia Jr. is the treasurer. So now now we can look at what happened during 1941. These are all the expenses of buying what's necessary for the team, and it's fun to look at the prices, for sure, on some of them. So there you go, 18 baseball uniforms, total cost $156, that type of price in 1941. That's that. And so here's the expenses that were incurred by the team. Hotel lodgings, look at the cost, $2. This is the fancy place. This is the fancy place, so that commands $250. And this is what happened when a visiting team came in. You had to pay them $100. That was standard. And again, they're moving chairs and tables, etc., to Chew Field. And so you have all this transportation and very interesting looking vehicles that did it. So I'm sure this is a memory lane for some of you. Gendro moving, fitting. Yeah. $500 folding chairs, $40. Oh, yeah, we had to travel now, so transportation. Lots of tickets, et cetera, to be printed.
It's 2 million.
Now, this is interesting. Next few. Why are they incurring this expense? They're covering the fences so people can't watch the game for free. We had Western Union expenses, minimal. This is a great picture. We love that truck with its loudspeaker system. Now, this is revenue. So we've got the expenses. This is an example of the revenue. And again, many of us that are older are going to recognize 4 of the names. Purchasing season tickets. So these are the subscribers. This is sort of a summary of their income. And this is good because it tells us how many people attended. The tickets for children were 10 cents, but for adults, it's 40 cents to go to a game. Okay? But the government doesn't want you to keep all that money, so they take 4 cents. So you get to keep 36 cents. And it sort of tells us how many, as it's going down, the number of people that attended each of these games. Now this is really fascinating. Player earnings, they're offering this guy, he must have been really good, $20 to $25 a game. But these are the play, and there's Ray Cody, who made a lot of money over several games. He's better off than most. And there's Tom Hammond getting $35. So you might, again, recognize, like Billy Steele was a wonderful man. He got $3 for playing a game at the top there. That's their compensation for a given game. And again, somewhere between 3 and 10, one person, that's that was the biggest income night, the House of David. Now, by the end of the season, we're in trouble. We're not being, not paying our bills as quickly as we might. And so, at the end of the season, and going into the next season, we ended up with a little over $59 for the season. Guess what? There was no team in 1942. So we weren't one of those that kept the New England League going. The historian William Manchester would write, "It had been a fine golden autumn, a lovely farewell to those who would lose their youth and in some cases their lives." And so suddenly trying to win baseball games in Fall River at True Field is less important than trying to defeat totalitarianism. And so Attorney Frank Silvia Jr., my uncle, and his Paul is here tonight, and this is Frank after he left being treasurer of Fall River and in officers training school. And basically, that's what happened. Now, just for a second, another person that played in Forest Stadium is Bob Tripp. And Bob Tripp hit a game-winning home run to end the All-Star game in 1950. He's a wonderful man. I talked to him today. I think he's 91 years old. He ended up being in the service. So now we're talking about danger. My Uncle Frank had danger in the Philippines. Bob Tripp, baseball player from Fall River, had quite the experience on the high seas.
I was assigned to a division of the Navy that was only in World War II. It was called the Armed Guard. And we were gunners on merchant ships. So we spent a month actually living on the ship while it was being built. Then we got on the ship, went down the ship canal to Galveston, Texas, and had it demagnetized. We got our cargo. Our cargo was 10,000 tons of bombs. And in the it's like 10 rows of 12 ships. And the ships with the most dangerous cargoes are in the middle, so we're dead center. Everybody called it the Hollywood Navy because we didn't have the spin and polish of the regular Navy. And then we hit a storm out in the North Atlantic. If you knew the history of these Liberty ships, they were literally built in a month. And they were just the bare metal, and some of them actually broken too. And I can tell you, in this 4 days, I still don't know how this one didn't. There'd be like 6 destroyer escorts, and if a German submarine showed up, we'd separate, and they'd come right up beside us. So we'd have a few scares like that.
They ran into a storm. The storm was so bad that 2 of the Liberty ships that were not the one he was on split in half, and everybody was lost. And he said he was tied by ropes. Everybody in the vessel was tied by ropes for 4 days. The only person that could move around was the chef who brought sandwiches and drinks. So that became the new reality. Well, at any rate, I'm going to transition into the 1950s quickly. And what was happening then is, again, I've already spoken about this, from 1946 to 1949, we had our Fall River Indians team at Joe Madowski's Fall River Stadium. And then that went away after the 1949 season. These are all the players, or most of the players, that were on the other New England teams in 1949 that all made it to the major leagues. And so what I'm going to suggest is that they were the opposition, and we would have, as Fall River baseball fans, have followed their careers because they had played against Fall River and probably wished them well. The only person we had that we could root for was Tommy Hurd, who pitched for us, played for us back in 1947. Now, of all the people that on that list that I just showed you, there's just a couple of colorful guys. This guy got to bat Steve Cusick. He played for Colgate, and then he got called up for one game from the New England League, and it's the end of the season, and it's rainy, and it's dark, and it's nasty, and the players are cold. So some of the players light a bonfire on the steps of the dugout to tell the umpire he should have canceled the game, and the umpire won't do it. So now this guy walks out into the on-deck circle with a rain slicker on, and and the ump finally says, "You're out." So Cusick gets to pinch hit against Don Newcomb, and it's almost dark. That's pleasant, right? Hits a double, retires, has a 1,000 career average. All right. The next one, Don Hoke. This guy's great from the New England League. He decided he would be a boxer. He has 7 matches. He gets knocked out 7 times. Goes back to baseball. But he's not punch drunk. He's a smart guy, and rules get changed because of him. He's off second base one time. The batter hits a hard ground ball right to the shortstop. It's going right to the shortstop. Houck grabs the ball and holds it. He's out, only 1 out. They had to change the rule and say the batter's also out if you interfere that way. Okay? He's on third base. Guy hits a long drive. It just cures foul. All of a sudden, the umpire looks. Houck's 1 step from home plate. The umpire says, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm taking my lead." The umpire throws the ball back to the mound. He steps on the plate. New rule, you've got to go back to third base. Got to tag up. But my favorite is this guy, Clint Courtney, scrap iron. Just a tough guy. And I talked to a former catcher, a young man, and he said the ball was coming in, and I had my foot just covering the front of the plate. And Courtney, unfortunately for him, was on second base. He said, he hit me so hard that one of my shin guards went flying up into the air. So he was scrap iron. He was unafraid of nobody, said Virgil Trucks. This guy is just an absolute character. He spiked Phil Rizzuto in the chest. He plays for real. But my favorite story is he buys himself a white Cadillac every year that he makes it to the major leagues, and he drives it all year. So he's got this reporter who says, I'm going to get a ride from him. And he says, I get in the car at the end of the season, and there's this awful odor. And he looks in the back, and there's empty beer cans. So he asked him about it, and he says, well, yeah, I celebrate after games driving home. And he said, well, how many beer cans are there? He says, how many home games do we play? Multiply by 6. So these are the guys we're rooting for. But at the local level, we've got our own ball playing taking place, and this is CYO champions of 1952, Ducky Monto, Joe Feidelberg, Dan and Pin Bogan, Steve Naraki, a bunch of people that many of you would know. And they won the Diocesan Championship, and they were honored. And it's such a big deal back then that they have a Major League umpire come as the guest speaker. And there's Don Montel starting out. Adi Gore, and Adi Gore is complaining. He says games are too slow. The pitchers should be forced to keep their foot on the rubber, et cetera, et cetera. But Adi Gore gave a great talk, and it was much appreciated. So that was a highlight in 1952. The umpires, like Adi Gore, were scared silly because there was actually, MIT had this photoelectric system, and they almost came up in 1950 with a strike zone to get rid of the home plate umpire. And that didn't happen, so the umpires were happy. The following year, it's going to be, this is Adi Gore, I think, again. So now we're on to 1953, and this is the famous Hank Soar, a well-known umpire. He was a great athlete himself, and he played for the New York Football Giants, as did Johnny Del Isola, who's on the left. Johnny Del Isola used to always go to Tommy DiNucci's studio, Acres Restaurant. And so was on the championship team, the Giants championship team of 1938, which will be repeated this year. So, the 1953 Sacred Hearts are the champions. There's Ray Medeiros circled, crafty pitcher and Durfee coach, and there's other people like Jack McCann's there, and others that you might identify. If you weren't big enough, though, to be a player, you could be a cute little mascot like John Cummings. So, and this was one of the message which will lead us into something that Saw thought that Jimmy Pearsall in 1953 was going to be really terrific. Well, to see some of these players, we can turn now to the two barnstorming games, 1951 and 1953. I've already mentioned in 1950 the game was won by the Fall River side 4-3 thanks to a home run by Bob Tripp. Now, 1951, it's Bertie Tebbetts coming back for another year. The Major League All-Stars have been promised by Tebbetts, I have promised rather, that they'd come back to Fall River because they got such a good reception in 1950, and there'd be a Sunday afternoon game. Luke Urban would be the manager of Fall River, assisted by Tom Hammond, and the fans were going to have a real treat, especially Yankee fans from Billy's Cafe. They would get to see a Yankee player, Gil McDougall, the sensational rookie who had hit a grand slam. No, we're not there, sir. You are at the top. Okay. I'm backtracking, thanks to Stephanie. The 1950s is when we love sports memorabilia, right? We all look back to it. Mantle's card is now worth supposedly more than Honus Wagner's. We all know that we had cards that we saved, and if we only had kept them, they'd be worth so much money, etc. So everybody has those stories in the 1950s. This guy, even before the 1950s, had a real opportunity to make money on baseball memorabilia. So you'll see what's happening to our friend Bino Strollo.
When he wanted to play Olympic, no better heart. And he said, we're gonna go in the dugout. I said, you carry him? He said, no, you're from a ball. He says, you can make them anxious. He says, but you don't play, bro. He says, we're gonna go in and he was a big shot, and he knew them guys. He must have took a lot of guys. At that time, there was nothing talking about signing, autographs. Autographs was, nothing, nobody was valuing the autograph or nothing like that. He says, he said, they're all gonna sign the ball. Brand new ball. Signed it. There were names on there, Melot, all that. Beautiful. I'm telling you, the names of most popular, brand new. I gave this away, I gave that away. I gave my glove away. I used to give things away, So my nephew, Bobby, I said, hey Bobby, take this ball. This nice ball. Oh, but they signed here. Save it. Okay. So, saved it. I thought he saved it. Then there's autograph stuff coming out. And I told the guy's name, he says, guy said, and no exaggeration, Phil. He turned around and he said, that ball's worth a couple of $100,000 if it's in good shape. I said, brand new. They said, wow, Pino, you're gonna have money. You see the right person, and out, you get your connection. I said, gee, okay. I go see the kid, I said, hey, where's that ball? Oh, we've been playing with that ball a long time. I almost passed out. I know all the things there. And well, my fault. I should have never done a thing like that.
So they're coming in 1951, and McDougal, as we said, and Johnny Pesky's going to be playing. There's a lot of well-known players. There's McDougal coming back from his Grand Slam home run in the World Series. McDougal's line drive, of course, impaired the future of Herb Score's career. Interesting, McDougal himself was hit by a batted ball in a practice at one point. He was a baseball coach at My Fordham, and he turned deaf because of it, and he had to resign as the coach. So here's the deal: the All-Stars will loan a major league pitcher to the Fall River team to make the game more evenly balanced, and maybe to prevent people from getting hit by pitches. So we get Sal the Barber, okay? So this is just tremendous. Sal the Barber, he scares you to death. He's scowling, he's gnashing his teeth. If you try to dig in on him, there goes your Adam's apple. So he's had a tremendous couple of years, 18-4 the year he comes into Fall River. He's winning over 80% of his games in 1950 and 1951, 1952. So he's a real catch to have in Fall River. And the other thing that's interesting is, as a pitching coach, he trained Bill Monbouquette and Dick Raditz, who both credited their advancing careers to him. And Mambo, in turn, made sure that Jim Lomberg, he might be Gentleman Jim, but Jim Lomberg learned to pitch inside at the batters. And Lomberg hit more people than any other pitcher in 1967, but he helped the Red Sox win the pennant, and he helped our Gibby to be on a pennant winner, so that's all good stuff. Now, as far as the game is concerned, the All-Stars are going to win the game against Fall River this year, 5-2, and that's because Maureen McDermott has pitched against us. Maureen McDermott pitches a complete game now against Fall River. That's taking good care of his arm, right? Throws 10 innings, but management thought nothing of that. Red Sox management, they had pitched McDermott 17 innings in a game earlier in the season, a game that went 19 innings. So he throws and he wins. Magley doesn't do as well against the major leaguers, and so what happens is he gives up the 5 runs, and the All-Stars losing 5-2. He comes out after 6 innings, and then what happens? The Major League All-Stars are pitched to by Art Ryan, and Art Ryan's from the Maplewood League. I don't know if anybody remembers him, and he throws. He throws two perfect innings, and Pesky pops up and comes back to the dugout slamming his bat. He's absolutely irate against this kid from Fall River. And then Huey Riley comes in, as Greg Sullivan noted recently, and he pitches a perfect 9th inning. So the Fall River kids shut down nine straight batters in the major league on the major league team, even though they lost the game. Now the big attraction was Walt Dropo. Okay, where was he from? Moose-Up, Connecticut, right. So the Moose from Moose-Up, Connecticut, he had a great season in 1950. Now he's back in 1951. He was here in 1950. He hit a home run. He's a big hero. 1950, he hits 34 home runs. He has 144 RBIs. He bats .322. 1951, he bats .239. He has 11 home runs and 57 RBIs. So he's had a real big, he's been a big shot. And now suddenly he's upon hard times. He doesn't get the ball out of the infield. The fans are booing him at Fall River Stadium. Statistician Bill James said he had the most unpredictable career of the 1950s. He's the only person to ever hit a ball over the Great Wall of China, though. His family was involved with a fireworks company. So, at any rate, the game itself, despite these people we've mentioned, really focused on the fact that Bobby Thompson comes to Fall River. Okay, it's 1951, folks. Bobby Thompson is on the All-Star team. Let's go into that, Steph. There's the home run, right? The great home run that Thompson hit off Ralph Branca. Branca, who died recently, you know, you say he's a loser. He wasn't a loser. He was a great friend, and he supported Jackie Robinson, and he helped indigent ball players the rest of his life after his own career was over. But now we have the shot heard round the world.
Number one, the shot heard round the world.
Leo DeRocha. Uh, 11 days after he hit the shot heard around the world, Bobby Thompson's in Fall River. Now, he doesn't need the money. He just was on Perry Como's show for $1,000. So he's going to pick up a couple of chump change, $100 in Fall River playing. I think what's going on is he's heard that Fall River is a great honeymoon town. Okay? And it must be beautiful along the odorous Wickershan River. So I'm firmly convinced that that's really why he was here. He wanted to see if this is where he should have his honeymoon. Because 6 days after Fall River, Bobby Thompson was married. Frank Sinatra, always risque, was at that game, and he famously said, "I never thought you could have so much fun in daylight." Frank McGrath commented on another of the players, Al Rosen, that was also on the team, and Rosen, of course, is a great player. Yet the interesting thing about Rosen, if we keep going, is that even though he accommodated the kids and gave out more autographs, according to McGrath, than anyone else, he had a little bit of rabbit ears. And he said he chastised a Fall River fan for yelling at him. And what had the fan said? "You're a bum." And he said, that makes me boil. So, and he said, the fan shut up. So I don't know about that. At any rate, it's a very casual game. Kids come out from the bleachers, and they greet the players who are out in the outfield. Guy runs around Serpentine being chased by kids. They said everybody got a big kick out of that. And finally, what happens is, this is great. Some kids have autographs already, or they don't have autographs, but they've bought scorecards. So they try to put them through cracks in the dugout at Fall River Stadium. No one said Fall River Stadium was perfectly constructed. So there's these places they're putting it through. But at the end of the game, there's 2 outs, and the count's 2-2 on the Fall River batter, and all the players on the team behind McDermott run off the field. And he strikes out the Fall River guy, and the game ends, and they're already in their cars and taking off. But when you think about that, the end result was Fall River had 3,100 plus fans there, 3,117. The previous year, 3,276. Tebbett said it's down a little. He said, you know what, and this was what's happening. Baseball was ruining minor league baseball. He said, you think everybody would have come out to see Bobby Thompson. but they had had enough watching him on TV. So that basically is what happened in 1951. 1953, the final game. I'm tempted to stop here and do this next year. What do you think? I promised an hour to dear Jerry. I could do this quickly because it's entertaining. The number one person that comes in 1953 is Vic Raschi. Okay, and Raschi's from the Yankees, and he's going to pitch for the Fall River side, and Maury McDermott's also going to pitch on our side this year. So there's a switch here. McDermott's back for a second time, but he's pitching on our side. Now McDermott's had his best season. He's 18-10, 3.01 earned run average, the problem is, the person he emulates the most is one of my heroes when I was that age. It was Ellis Kinder. Kinder was a great pitcher, but he was like the league drunk. And it was remarkable, the hangovers he could have and how he could still pitch well. Well, Mickey McDermott is just like Kinder. And they asked what color was what's his facial coloring? They said, nightclub pallor. So they just do outrageous things. I think McDermott's problem goes back to his father, though. His father was an aspiring minor league ball player, and he got removed, and somebody else took his place on the minor league team playing first base, and that was Lou Gehrig. So on the way up. So the father wanted Maurice to do well. So the father, while McDermott is still not an adult, he arranged the contract, major league contract. Mickey McDermott gets $5,000. The father gets 2 truckloads of Ballantine ale. That's the contract. Well, McDermott and Raschi didn't have great days for us by any means, and we end up losing. The last guy that came in was Johnny Hillman from Fall River, who pitched 2 innings, and he gave up no runs. A little bit more about Vic Raschi, though. Eddie Lopat was the guy that was loaned in 1950 to the Fall River team. Everybody said he's the nicest guy in the world, wonderful. Vic Raschi, if I go through, I've gone back to page 1 stuff.
What?
Vic Raschi. Oh, that's beyond that, I think. Well, anyway, Vic Raschi is not, he pitches angry. He pitches angry. And the Yankees are stinkers. Ever heard of George Weiss? He's the general manager. And if George Weiss thought that his players were worth $1 million, he would try to get it down so the team payroll is $600,000. He gets it down to $600,000. Ownership gives him a big bonus based on the $400,000 that he saved. And Raschi fights them all away. He says he won't look you in the eye. And I think if there's ever a guy I could compare him to, it's Buddy Bavasi. And Buddy Bavasi, the Dodgers guy that the Yankees are playing, he's the same kind of a general manager. What Buddy Bavasi would do, you're in and you think you're worth $10,000, say, and Buddy Bavasi would go to the bathroom or go to see someone for a minute, and he'd leave signed contracts on his desk. And so, you're inquisitive. You go over and you say, oh my God, that guy's better than me. And he signed for $8,000. I better accept the $10,000 that Bavasi's offering me. And they're all phony contracts. But I love Raschi. Raschi, as they said, Vic pitched angry. And the guy he focused on was his catcher, our friend Yogi. Get back behind your cage where you belong, you sawed-off gorilla. Wasn't very tall. Yogi, get your Dago ass back behind the plate. Here comes Yogi again. Yogi, get the hell out of here with your 6th grade education. Raschi went to William and Mary. So at any rate, what happened, and I'm just bridging this a bit, was that the Fall River team lost to a bonus baby, Joey J. Joey J had came in and he pitched 7 innings and defeated us, and the final score was 4-1. But some of the Fall River people did well. Franny Regan, we're a little off where we need to be, but I'm on page 3, Steph, of 1953. Yeah, there's Joey J. There's Ted at that time when he went off in the service, a story that I'll not tell for time purposes. Here's Joe Andrews, who played and had a hit in this 1953 game. And yet the star, of course, was Jimmy Pearsall. Pearsall was the school wonder boy. We know he defeated Durfee in 1947 in basketball. The Celtics were interested in him. But he's volatile. In 1952, he gets in a fight. Who does he get in a fight with? Billy Martin. Now, there's 2 low-key personalities. But Pearsall called him a Dago Busher. And Pearsall didn't know that he was Portuguese, or there could have been another ethnic slur word. So they had a fight, and then Pearsall comes in and has another fight with McDermott on his own team. So he has 2 fights in one day. And then after a while, what we know happens is Martin says, I feel sorry, I didn't know Pearsall was sick. Sometimes I think I'm ready for the white guys, the guys in the white coats to come get me as well, which I think was true. So Pearsall ends up in 1952 spanking the 4-year-old son of Vern Stevens in the clubhouse. Fortunately, Vern wasn't in the clubhouse at the time. So Pearsall got demoted to the minor leagues. He was in the minor league, he pulls some antics, the umpire tosses him out of the game. All of a sudden, there's a lot of noise. There were 500 knothole kids invited in for free by management, and they're all screaming, "We want Pearsall," and Pearsall's in his uniform leading the cheer. Anyway, at the end of the game, McDermott went by first base, and Pearsall tried to pick him off. And Walt Dropo grabbed McDermott by the waist so he couldn't get back to the bag, and everybody's laughing. It's sort of a joking atmosphere. But the joke was really on the All-Stars because the attendance was only 1663. And Spec Shea, who is now the manager, said, "I don't think I'm even going to break even." So as far as I know, that's basically how it peters out in 1953. But we might look at a little bit more optimistic moment. They did stay. We're going to skip by. Yeah, we're going to skip by.
You're going to skip by?
Yeah. We're going to show Fierce Strikes Out. Pearsall's Fierce Strikes Out. But again, some pictures of Pearsall. That's a nice picture. So all these players that we've just been talking about, along with, I haven't mentioned, Eddie Pellegrini, went to the Hotel Mellon the day of the game in 1953. And what a thrill that would have been if you had walked in and had a chance to sit down with them. Or, in the case of Mickey McDermott, go to the bar. There's one of the players that was there. And even though they were there for breakfast, I think you probably could have had a drink with Mickey. And this is the last picture I have, basically, of Eddie Pellegrini and Walt Dropo and Sam Mealy. They came to Fall River in 1956 because they knew Fall River people had received them well, and they were advertising a real estate company that they were very successful with in the Boston area, and they were hoping to come to Fall River. Well, that's... I had one thing that we were going to talk about, and that's what happened to Fall River Stadium after 1953. And I'm going to hold that off, and thank you for your attention. I went a little too far. If there are old timers with happy memories, I'd love you to come up and just exchange your thoughts. I know people were at the game. I read things in print, but there's other things that you know that aren't in print that would be fun to learn about. But thank you so much. Okay.
Thank you.